Hey guys, Jules here with Ableton Tips, and today we're going to be making a short section of the Toy remix by Boris Brejcha, and it sounds like this. Okay, so first up we're going to be making this bass call channel, which sounds like this. And I'm just going to quickly talk through it and then we'll remake it. So if we just look at the MIDI for this, we can see it's all on the D note here, D0. There's a bit of a difference here. We have a lower velocity on this note than the rest of them. And that's just because in the original it sounded like this note was playing, but it was just quite a bit quieter. If we have a look at analog, it's just one oscillator with a saw wave. And we're not doing anything with the filter here. The amplifier is set to decay of 626 milliseconds, and it's got a very short release, just so that the sound can tail out of it. Then we're going into a compressor, which is side chaining it to the kick. Quite a deep side chain. And then some pretty drastic EQ just to bring out the sub in the synth. Without it, it sounds like that. So that makes it nice and subby. And we're taking out a bit of the mid-range. And then we're kind of adding in the mid-range, but we're using some filter drive on this auto filter. So without the auto filter, it doesn't have any of that like round, distorted character in the mid-range. Okay, so let's quickly remake this. So we're going to make a new channel and we're going to grab analog. We're going to turn off the other oscillator. It's already set to our saw wave. And so we're just going to remake the MIDI now. So we're going to take this and just hit Control-Shift-M to make a new MIDI clip. Then we're going to go down to D0. I'm going to place a note here. And let's just hear it. Okay. And then we need to place another one here, another one, and there we go. That's our basic pattern. Oops, I meant to copy that. So let's just copy that back there. And then if we just duplicate this MIDI clip and cut out the end of it, then we've basically just got this, this note repeating over here. And then we're just going to take this and copy it over to this section. So I'm just going to highlight here and duplicate it. And I'm going to duplicate that all the way across. Let's not forget we need to bring down the velocity of this note. So let's just bring down that velocity here. Okay, and now I'm just going to copy this and paste it so that that velocity is copied over there. Okay, next up, let's set up our amp envelope. So 626 milliseconds, that's the same. Yep. And we're just having 85 milliseconds of release. This one, you can hear the release is quite long, so it's got quite a tail. We want to just bring that tail down. We can click here and just type 85 milliseconds. Oops, 0.085. Okay, so I'm just going to bring down the volume of this channel. And next up, we're going to go into our compressor. And that's going to be sidechain to our kick, which we haven't actually created yet. So we can set that up when we've got our kick in. So I'm just going to leave the compressor there for now. Okay, now we're going to start EQing this bass. So we are taking our first node here and just boosting this bass quite a bit here, the sub. Then we're going to bring down a bit of the mid-range here and cut out some of that top end. So I'm really doing this by ear. It's not exactly the same as this one, but it's pretty similar. And now we're going to get some real character out of this bass line by grabbing our auto filter, and we're going to bring down the cutoff over here. And this number needs to be a bit more specific here. We need to bring it down to 447 Hertz. So let's just bring up the resonance. And then I'm just going to type 447. And we're going to change this to our PRD mode over here. And we're going to give it some drive. Okay. And we're going to change this to 12. Yeah, so it's not as steep a curve. And this is still quite loud, so I'm just going to bring it down. Okay, and then we just need to bring this down one more octave. So I'm going to go here and just turn down the octave instead of doing it through the MIDI. Okay, so it still doesn't sound right, but that's just because the compressor needs to create that kind of sweep in for us. So I think the next best channel that we can do is adding the kick. So I'm just going to go here below the kick, create a new MIDI channel, a new audio channel. And I'm just going to use my go-to kick for this one, which is kick 7 in my Midnight Punch pack. And all we're going to do is just shorten that a bit and create a bit of a fade out. Then I'm just going to duplicate this out a few times and duplicate this out. And that covers the whole track. And there's also a few kicks here in the intro. So just add those over there. And then if we just look at this kick over here, we can see that we're using an auto filter to cut out the low end and the high end, just in these in the build-up. So we can do that with this too. So we'll grab an auto filter, and we're going to make this a low cut, and we're going to be cutting it to 100 Hertz, more or less. It's fine over there. And then over here, we're going to be opening up that filter and allowing the kick to come through. And then we're going to add another auto filter, which is going to be cutting out the high end. And that's coming down to 4.8 kilohertz. And then dropping even further down over here to 800 or so. There we go. And then it opens back up for this kick. Okay, then I'm just going to bring down the volume of the kick to -3.7. Okay, now we can go back to our analog and we can sidechain to our new kick. So we hit sidechain, and I'm just going to name this new kick so it's easy for me to find. I'm going to name this new bass call. Okay, so we're going to sidechain it to the new kick. And we're going to do quite a deep sidechain here. Okay, and let's just have a look at our sidechain settings here. We've got an EQ here that's cutting out the low end of the kick as it's coming into the sidechain, so that we're only really sidechaining to the top end of the kick. And that's being filtered to 290 Hertz. So we're bringing up this frequency to 290. We're bringing up the ratio up to infinity to 1, which is basically turning it into a limiter. So it's not going to be letting any signal through. Then we're bringing this threshold to -32.1. And then the release is at 17.5 milliseconds, which makes it shorter. But now we're going to be boosting the incoming gain by 13.5 dB, and you'll see how that signal kind of grows as I turn it up. Okay, let's just type 13.5. Okay, and now we're going to just readjust this volume, bring it back down in line. Okay, so that's our bass call channel done. Next up is the bass response, which is basically just like a little sub hit that responds to this. So if the call is this one, then the response is. Okay, so let's quickly just talk through this channel and see how it was made. First of all, we're staying on the D note here, and you can see this note, the first one over here, has a little bit of swing. It's not landing perfectly on the grid. And we're going into analog over here. We've got one oscillator, and it's got a pitch envelope on it at 94%. And we've got the time set to 20%, and that's giving it like a little bit of a pitch attack. So if I had to set this back to 0, that sounds like that. And if I just hit Control Z, you can hear that's kind of giving this like pitch attack to it. And then we are not doing anything with the filter. Then we, looking at the amp envelope, we've got quite a short decay, 526 milliseconds. We've got a little bit of attack on it to eliminate any clicks. And then the sustain is set down quite low. And we've got a release of 265 milliseconds. And that's pretty much it for analog over here. Then we're going into an EQ, which is boosting the sub by quite a lot, 9 dB. And a small little boost here in the mid-range too. Then we're going into auto filter, which is cutting out quite a lot. It's filtered down to 133 Hertz with a 12 dB slope on it. And then it's also got some drive on this PRD model. And then we go into the same setup, the same sidechain setup that we had before. Okay, so now let's remake this channel. So new MIDI channel, Control-Shift-T, and then we're just going to highlight this, Control-Shift-M. We're going to go down to D0, and we're going to place a note here. But remember, it's got a little bit of swing on it, so we just need to shift this note a little bit back. Just give it a bit of swing. And then we're placing another note over here. And our velocities are set quite low, so let's just bring these velocities back up to about 100. And then we're going to add analog. So we're turning off the second oscillator. We only want one. And it sounds like this now. Okay, so we're going to click on this oscillator here. We're going to add our pitch envelope. And remember that was at 94%. So I'm just going to click here and type 94. And you can hear that's given it like this almost like laser vibe. So we want to bring down the time until it sounds like a bit more punchy. Okay, so at 20%, we're getting that like little pitch attack there. Okay, then we're going to go into the decay here on the amp envelope, and we're going to set it to 526 just to make the decay a little bit shorter. Sorry, 0.526. And then the sustain was at 0.19. And that's just made it like a bit more plucky. And then our release is set to 256 to 0.256, yeah. And that just makes it so the tail fades out quicker. Then we're going into EQ8 to boost the sub. So let's just boost that sub, and it was about 9 dB of boost here. And we're also boosting the mid-range slightly. Okay, then next up is the auto filter. We bring that frequency down to 133 Hertz to cut out the top end. And we want to change the model here to PRD, and we're going to give it about 10 dB of drive. And we need to just make sure that we set this to a 12 dB filter just to let a little bit more of those frequencies through into the mid-range. Okay, so that's basically the sound done. We just need to sidechain it, and to make things quicker, all we do is just go into our previous channel that we made, and take the compressor from here, copy it, and then paste it onto this chain. And then we can hear that's being sidechained. Okay, and now we can just duplicate this out through the rest of the loop. the quickest way to do that is to just double click on the MIDI clip, make sure that loop is enabled, and then we can just drag that across. Now we want to just set our volume in context with our other bass and our kick. So let's hear these all together. Okay, this needs to be turned down quite a lot. We only really want to feel it. We don't want it to like be right at the front of the mix. Okay, that sounds good to me. And I'm just going to name this the new bass response. Okay, next up is this little saw stab. It sounds like this. And this was made with Wavetable. Here we can see we have two oscillators. One's turned down 5 dB. They're both saw waves. Then we're going into this filter here, which isn't moving. It's just staying where it is here at 1.3 kilohertz with quite a bit of resonance. And then we're going into our amp envelope, which has a little short attack time on it, 1 milliseconds, 1 second of decay, quite a long decay, and the sustain is set to -6.5. And we got a very short release on it. So it makes it quite a long sustained sound, but it's still got a bit of a pluck in it. Okay, then we've got some unison set to shimmer over here with 8 voices and 59% amount. So if I turn unison off, that's how it sounds, but this is giving it that width and making it feel like a bit more like a super saw. Okay, then we are cutting out the low end with this EQ8 here. And then I'm using the auto filter to kind of give it that filter movement, and that's being automated. So if we click on that, we can see how that automation moves. It starts off at 670 hertz and then goes down to 304 hertz. And then we're going into this EQ8, which is kind of boosting a little bit of that sub frequency here. Then we go into this EQ8, which is just boosting a little bit of the sub frequency that we've cut out. I probably should have just done this within that EQ, but to me, it just sounded like there was a little bit more sub than what I had taken out. So I pushed that up again using this one, and you can hear it. It's quite subtle, but it is there. And then we got the compressor with the same settings as before. Okay, so let's make a new channel. And we're going to load up Wavetable. And you can see we're staying still at D0. So let's just make a new MIDI clip, Control-Shift-M. And we're going to place our notes here at D0. So I'm going to shift this down to D0. And these are just coming out to there. And then we're going to duplicate that and place it on this one. So they're just landing on the kick pretty much. Okay, now that sounds like this. Just sounds like sub. Okay, so our first oscillator is actually pitched up 12 semitones. And our second oscillator is pitched up 24 semitones. So that's up 1 octave and up 2 octaves. But we need to change these to saw waves. So I'm going to just drag this up to saw. And this one too. Okay, and then the second oscillator is also brought down by 5 dB. It's not as loud. Okay, then the frequency on the filter is set to 1.3 kilohertz. So to do that, we can just type 1300. And we've got resonance, quite a lot of resonance on there, about 50%. Okay, then the decay is set to about 1 second on the amp envelope. So we can just type 1000 here and that'll make it 1 second. Then this is set to -6.5 and the release is set to about 2 milliseconds more or less. So we'll just bring that down almost all the way. Now we need to make this into a bit more of a like super saw sound. So we're going to turn on unison, make it shimmer. I'm going to bring up the voices to 8 voices. And we're going to bring up the amount here of unison to 59%. Okay, so now we've got the base of the sound set up. Next up, we're just going to be adding an EQ8 here, and we're going to change this to a low cut. And we're just going to bring this up to about 198 hertz. So let's just type it in here, 198. Next up was we grabbing this auto filter. We're going to bring this down to 672 hertz. And you'll hear that's cutting out the high end from it. And we're going to give it 23% here on resonance. And then we're going to be automating it so that it fades down over the note length to around 300 hertz. So if we just click on frequency here, we can click there and then just make another point. And it's probably a bit easier if we drag this out so that we have a bit more fine control over the curve, and zoom in a bit more here. And we're just going to bring this down to about 300 hertz. Okay, and let's just bring this a little bit further down to closer to 300. And as you can see, the note lengths are slightly different to the original. So we're just going to highlight both of these and shorten them a little bit here. And then we're going to go in and we need to change this to our 12 dB filter. And then we can just take this and copy it. We'll just hit Control D there and duplicate it across. Okay, and next up is the EQ8, which is just boosting at 72 hertz. So let's just create an EQ8 here. And we're just going to take this second one here and set it to around 72 and give it a little bit of a boost here. And I'm just holding Alt and just increasing that Q amount by clicking and dragging this up, just to make it a bit more narrow. Okay, and then we're going to be grabbing our compressor, which is doing the side chain, and just placing it on the end here. Just copy and paste. Okay, and that sounds good to me. Let's duplicate this out until it covers the full length over here. And you'll notice that the last one, the frequency comes up quite a bit because it opens up. And we can do that by just highlighting this section over here. And then these little boxes appear. We can grab this corner box and fade it up. Yeah, that's more like it. Okay, then you'll notice that this one is actually switched off. And the reason for that is that in this track, the end of it actually doesn't have a kick in it. You'll see the kick is actually switched off over here on the last two beats. And without the kick, we don't have any side chain. So this ends up sounding a bit strange compared to this. It doesn't have that dip. So to do that, I turned on the kicks and then resampled it with the sidechain enabled so that we have the sidechain printed into the audio file. So to do that, let's quickly make a new audio channel. We're just going to arm it and then change this to resampling. And now if I hit record, you can see that's printing it to audio with the sidechain. You can see the sidechain in there. And now I can turn this off and I can turn off my kicks and we will still hear the sidechain in this file here. I just want to bring down the volume here to -2.2. Okay, and then there's one more place where we have used this resampled audio, and that is here in the build-up. And you can hear there's still sidechain in it, but there's no kick there to sidechain to. So we're going to have to just resample that audio again. So let's grab our new one that we just made here. And we can use the audio channel that we were using. It's already armed. So we can just hit record here. And then we've got that audio. And we can drag this across over here. Next up, we're going to be making the little melody, which happens like at the end of each phrase here. It sounds like this. So it goes D, C, B flat, A, B flat. And this is being made in operator. So we've change the algorithm here for them to be running in parallel so that we can use each oscillator separately. And they're not modulating each other. They're just running straight out into the filter and out the output. And we're using two oscillators here. One's pitched up 1 octave. You can see the course is set to 2 over here. One is a saw wave. The lower octave is a saw wave, and it's brought down in volume a bit. The higher octave is a square wave. And then they're going into this filter, which has an envelope on it of 14%, a relatively long decay of 3 seconds. And that's kind of just moving the filter down over time and making it a bit more plucky. The sustain is set to 0. The frequency is set to 846 Hertz. And over time, it's been slightly automated up just a few Hertz, only 50 Hertz. It's just getting a slight bit brighter throughout the loop. And then it's going into a delay here, which has got it's set to the beat division 3 here. Feedback of 55% and dry wet 34%. That sounds like that without the reverb. Okay, and the hybrid reverb that we're using, the decay is set to 2.72 seconds. We've left it on dark hall and we've increased the dry wet to 56%. And then we've taken the EQ and just cut out some of that low end. Okay, so let's recreate this. We're going to make a new MIDI channel, Control-Shift-T, and I'm just going to double click here to create this MIDI clip. And we're going to place our notes down. So it goes down, believe it goes like that. And we're just going to copy this over to each phrase here. And then we're going to load up operator. We're going to set the course here to 2 on the second one. And we're just going to change the algorithm to make it run out in parallel so that they're not modulating each other. And then we're going to bring up the level of this one. So let's just hear how this sounds now. We're going to change the second one to a square, which is the square D here. And we want to change the first one to our saw. And we're going to bring down the volume here about -8. Okay, and then in terms of envelopes, we're just going to click on the envelope here on the first oscillator and bring up the sustain to 0. It's already set to 0, that's fine. Then we're going to bring up the sustain on the second one to 0 as well. Okay, then the filter is set to 846 Hertz. So let's just type 846. And we're going to automate this. We'll do it now. Just click there. And this one we're going to drag up to around 900 Hertz. So that it just gets brighter over the length of the loop. And then we're going to give the filter an envelope of 13% so that the filter moves according to this envelope. And the decay needs to be a bit longer. I think we had about 3 seconds here. And this is quite loud, so I'm just going to bring down the volume here to about -13. Okay, then next up we're going into a delay, and that's set to 3 here, and the feedback is turned up a bit. And the dry wet is brought down to 30%, around 30%. I'd say 35 is probably fine. And then we're going into our hybrid reverb with our dry wet turned up a little bit. And then the decay brought down a little bit. So yeah, that's set to about 2.4 seconds, and the dry wet's at 56%. And then the most important thing here is to just EQ out some of that low end. We don't want the lower octave having reverb on it. Okay, so next up is this Atmo Pluck, which is basically just almost like a drone note. And it's just kind of plotting along sounding like this. Okay, so this we're using analog. We've got two oscillators here. They're both saw waves. They're both in the same octave. There's no pitch or anything happening there. They're both going into this filter, which is set to 290 hertz. So it's cutting out quite a lot of the high end. And it's got an envelope of 1.83 over here, just to make it a little bit more plucky. And then it goes straight out into this reverb, which is a hybrid reverb set to the dark hole algorithm with a really long decay, 10-second decay, and 19% dry wet. And we're just rolling off some of that sub. And then we're going into this compressor, which is doing quite a long but shallow sidechain, and kind of just pumping it. So let's make a new channel, and I'm just going to highlight the section here and hit Ctrl-Shift-M, and then we're going to place a note here at D3 and just hit legato so it stretches out the full length, and then loop is enabled, and I'm just going to drag this across. Next we're going to load up analog, and sounds like this, but now we kind of wanted to do these quick 16th notes. And we're going to use an arpeggiator for this. So let's just search arpeggiator. And we're going to change the rate here to 16ths. And let's just turn this down. It's really loud. And now we're going to bring the frequency on this filter down to 290 hertz. And the envelope amount was 1.5. So it's not bright, it's just like really subdued. And I'm not going to change any of the decay settings, it sounds good enough to me. Nice and plucky. And then we're going into the hybrid reverb, which had a long decay of about 10 seconds. And 19% dry wet. Okay, and then we're just going to use a compressor here to kind of give it a bit of bounce. So going to sidechain it to our kick, which is new kick. Let's just have a look at the signal. So we're going to bring the threshold below the signal. And I kind of want this to stretch over into the next kick. So let's bring up the release. Okay, so now it's bouncing a little bit. All right, next up is this cymbal, which is just in the little build-up before the drop, and it sounds like this. It's just like a really long cymbal. How this was achieved is I just took a crash here from the Deep Premium pack, and we've placed it into a sampler, and then we're looping that sample back and forth on the tail of the crash. So you can see here it's moving back and forward like that. And then it goes into this hybrid reverb, which is set to 58%, which kind of helps mask the fact that it's looping because it kind of washes the sound over those loop points. And then we're going into this EQ8, which has a little point up here at 2.9 kilohertz, but that sweeps up to 4.26, so it kind of makes it almost like a sweep. Okay, so let's make that quickly. I'm going to make a new channel. I'm just going to make a MIDI clip here and place a note at C3 and hit legato just to stretch it over the whole length. And then we're going to go find our cymbal, which is named DPV5 Crash 1. So we're going to go to Deep Premium Volume 5 and search Crash 1. There it is. And then we're just going to double click on that, and that places it into a simpler, which is like a simple version of the sampler. And we're just going to quickly find a point where we can hear the cymbal tail nicely. I think over there sounds good. And then we're going to bring down this point. So now that we can loop that section. So let's just turn on loop. And then we're going to bring up the start value and shorten the length a little bit. And then we can add some fades here. Let's maybe lengthen that a bit. If we bring up the start, we can have a bit more of a fade. There you go, then that's pretty smooth, I would say. But now we don't want it to loop across like this. We want it to go forward and back. At the moment, it's just going forwards and then looping over, forwards and then looping over. We want it to loop forward and back because that just makes it a bit more smooth. And for that, we need to use sampler. So we can convert this into a sampler by right-clicking here and clicking simpler to sampler. So now you can see the sustain mode. It's currently set to forwards. We want to change that to forward back. So that's a lot smoother now. Then we can grab our hybrid reverb. And I'm just going to turn up the dry wet a little bit here. That sounds good to me. And then we're going to grab our EQ8. We're going to grab a point here and set it to about 2.4, around 2.4 kilohertz. And we're just going to bring up the Q a little bit, turn up the gain, so we've got a point that we can sweep with. Then we're going to click on the frequency here, and we're just going to automate this up to around 4 or 5 kilohertz. And I think the sweeping is a little bit too obvious here, so I'm just going to bring down the gain a little bit. Okay, now we don't want that reverb tail to bleed over into the drop. So I'm just going to click on the dry wet here and automate that out. So it cuts out on the drop. Okay, then next up is our clap. So the clap sounds like this. And it's made up of 2 layers. We're using Deep Premium 5, Deep 9 clap, which sounds like this. And we're using this clap 1 from my pack, Midnight Punch. And together, it's got a bit of character and punch. And there's also a bit of reverb on there, hybrid reverb, set to 25% with 441 millisecond decay, so it's quite a short reverb. Also, we set the blend here to 100 so that it's completely using the algorithm, the dark hole algorithm. And then we're doing quite a drastic EQ here. We're cutting out the high end up to 2 kilohertz, and then we're giving it a bit of a boost to give the reverb a bit of a darker character, so with and without the reverb. Kind of gives us this like resonant tail. And then looking at each of these individually, we've cut out a little bit of the high end from this clap, and then we've got a compressor which is side chaining it ever so slightly to the kick, and that just gives like the effect of the kick like biting into the clap. And then the same exact EQ and compressor on the second layer. All right, so let's make a new new audio channel here, and we're going to go in and find these claps. So we'll go to Deep Premium Volume 5, and we're just going to search for clap, and it was clap 9. This one. So we can drop that over there. And we're going to make another channel, and then we're going to go to Midnight Punch. And we're going to take clap 1 over here. And we're just going to set our volumes. So this one's at -5.8, and then this one's -10.6. And we're going to group these. I'm just going to highlight them both and hit Control G. And then on our group, we're going to take the hybrid reverb, and we're going to set the blend to 100%. We're going to bring down the decay to around 400 milliseconds. And then we're going to take the EQ, and we're just going to make this point a high cut. And we're just going to drag this down to about 2 kilohertz, and then take this second point over here and just boost that frequency. Then we're just going to take out some of the low end here. And we're going to bring down that dry wet so we can just hear that tail. Just like that. Okay, then next up we're going to grab an EQ and place it on our first clap. And we're just going to take out some of the high end. And then we're going to take a compressor and we're going to set up a very, very slight side chain to the kick here. So a side chain to the new kick. And let's bring this down so that we can see a small duck. We're going to bring up the frequency so that this point gets a little bit sharper. And bring that down. And then we're just going to take these and we're going to hit Control C and I'm going to paste it onto our other clap. Okay, next up is our hat. The hat's also 2 layers. And this is the first layer, second layer. And we can see that they've got some volume fades on them that are just making them nice and short. Without those, it's quite a long hat. And then we're going into an EQ8 here on the first hat. We're cutting out quite a lot of the mid-range. So if I turn that off, you'll see there's quite a lot of mid-range that we're cutting out. And then we're boosting here at around 7 kilohertz. Then on the second one, there's no processing. We're going into some group processing here. We've added a bit of reverb with 30% dry wet. And a short decay, 400 millisecond decay, and no other EQing to it. Then we're going into an EQ8 here, and we're cutting out all the mid-range and the lows there. And then we've got another point here at 8 kilohertz, and we're boosting that ever so slightly, and then rolling off the top end, just to make it a slight bit darker. We don't want that like super tinny and hissy sound up there. Okay, so let's just make our audio channels. I'm just going to hit Control T twice. So we have our 2 channels set up. We're going to go find our samples. We want noise hat 17 and close 16. Noise hat 17 is the first one, and closed 16. Okay, then let's set up our volume fades. So let's just bring this down first in volume. We're going to bring this down to here, and we're just going to turn off automation mode so that we can create this volume fade. And I'm just going to bring down this point here, so we've got a nice short hat. Okay, then we're just going to process this hat a little bit with some EQ. We're going to cut out the low end here, and we're going to grab the third note here and boost it around 8 kilohertz. Okay, and then our second hat, we're just going to bring down in volume, the same as the original, 12.2, and this one was minus 16.3. Okay, and then we just want to shorten this, so I'm just going to hit Control E and delete the tail here, and then fade this out. And then we're going to add a little bit of reverb and some more EQ to it, to the group. So let's highlight both of these and hit Control G. And then we're going to grab our hybrid reverb. We're going to bring down the dry wet 30%. And the decay down to around 400 milliseconds. And then we're going to do some more EQing to this group. We're going to cut out the mid-range. We're going to boost it again at around 8 kilohertz with a bit of a narrower Q. So by holding Alt and dragging this up, it just narrows that Q. And then we're going to roll off the high end a bit. Okay, so now we can just take this and duplicate it across the whole loop. The second last element is this percussion loop. And this is what it sounds like. Okay, so let's just make that quickly. We're using Deep Premium Volume 5, Perc Loop 5, Loop 5. And then we're just going to drag this out to cover the entire loop. And that sounds like this. It's a bit loud, so let's just bring it down to minus 9.5. Okay, so now the EQ on this is very specific, but basically I try to just remove certain elements that I didn't really want to hear. So if we listen to this, There's kind of like this mid-range dung 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 thing happening. And if I boost the frequency here, we can hear where it is. So that is what I want to remove. I want to bring down the gain quite a lot. And I don't really want this lower mid stuff. Okay, and then there's another sound here, which I kind of just want to reduce a little bit. So I'm just going to bring down the gain. And then we're just going to roll off or shelve off a bit at the top end. And then we're going to grab our delay and widen it. So to do this, we unlink the left and right, we turn off sync, we bring down the left one to 1 millisecond and the right one to about 20 milliseconds. Then we just bring down the feedback to 0 and then turn up the dry wet to 100%. And that's pushing it out to the sides. Okay, and then the final element is this ride, which is just landing on the last 2 beats where the kick isn't playing. And we've got a reverb on there with the dry wet set to 60%. And that sounds like this. So to remake this, we just make a new audio channel and we just search ride 007. And we just place it onto this channel, cut off the tail using Control E, delete, duplicate that again. I'm going to bring down the volume to minus 15.6. Sounds like this. And here you can hear the samples being warped. Kind of sounds a bit brittle, so I'm just going to turn off warping and then drag this out and duplicate it again. And then we go to hybrid reverb and we just set this to about 60%. Okay, and then all together it sounds like this. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and consider supporting us on productionmusiclive.com. Thank you and goodbye.